The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. NFP. Does that mean not-for-profit? Well, if you Google it and go onto the Australian Taxation Office website, that's the first mention, talking about tax concessions and the like for those wanting to set up a not-for-profit. But unfortunately, when you read the budget papers, indeed paper number 2, and you turn to page 56, under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan Continuing Delivery, NFP refers to not-for-publication. And it's NFP in 2024, 25, 2025, 26, 2026, 27, 2027, 28. NFP in lines of Department of the Treasury, Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Total payments, dash, 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 dash. You get where I'm coming from. It's not for publication. Why? If it is so important to the Australian Labor Party, so important apparently to Australian people, why in budget paper number 2 would the water buybacks be NFP? Because Labor doesn't want you to know, the people of Australia, how much they are going to spend on ruining river communities, on destroying those once vibrant regional towns and cities. Now, I live in the Murray-Darling Basin, and over again we see television advertisements paid for by taxpayer money from the Department of Climate Change and others talking about our plan to restore the rivers, protect, restore and better manage the Murray-Darling Basin for Australia's prosperity. A thriving, sustainable Murray-Darling. I could go on and on, but I won't. Well, that might all be well and good for those bureaucrats, and I'll come back to those a little bit later, but for those bureaucrats who sit on their shiny seats in Canberra, who think that our farmers are destroying the welfare of our river system, the livelihoods of those who live in the Murray-Darling Basin, far from it. Unfortunately, our ministers are being led by the nose all too often by those public servants, and we're going to get another 36,000 of them apparently, but by those public servants who very rarely get out of the bright, shiny lights of Canberra. And that is a shame. And so what we end up with is NFP in the budget paper when it refers to water buybacks. So that could be code for anything, but it is code for spending a whole lot of taxpayers' money on buying water back out of the system, just like earlier this year when we saw $205 million for 26 gigalitres a year. Now, that 26 gigalitres a year is being used by farmers. That 26 gigalitres a year is growing food and fibre to feed and clothe Australians and many others besides. And in the budget paper, it's NFP, because the government doesn't want our country people knowing how much they're going to spend. And it will come with a very, very large chequebook. And as soon as people see the Commonwealth waving a very large wad of cash, there will be farmers who will sell their water. And those farmers will leave those river communities, whether they're Deniliquin or Griffith or Hillston or Tocumwal, or I could go on and on. But they will leave those irrigation, those farming districts of southern Riverina, of right throughout the Murray-Darling Basin, and it will have such an impact upon those communities because the hairdresser will have less customers. The school will have less kids because the families will diminish in size, and then the teacher numbers will reduce. The state school system will reduce the number of teachers teaching in those classrooms. It has an effect on the little cafeterias, on the little coffee shops. It has an effect right throughout. not just a rippling effect, but a tidal wave effect in those smaller communities. And the smaller they are, the least they can afford to lose water out of their system. And it's such a shame. And it's such a shame. But this is a government which shows scant regard for our agricultural communities. And today is a day of shame. It truly is. Because today, legislation went into the House of Representatives to shut down the live sheep trade. The Nationals, the Coalition, sensibly wanted to send it to a committee for further work to be done, further research to be investigated. No, the government didn't want that. They just want to ram this through like they do everything, and no doubt, probably, they will gag the debate. I'm actually pleased I'm actually able to speak on the appropriations bills this year, because last year we weren't given that ability. We weren't given that opportunity because Labor just cut it off. Now, of course, the Coalition's never going to stop the appropriations bills, because this is supply. I won't say confidence, because there's not too much confidence in the government at the time, but it does provide the opportunity for Labor to have the money to spend it on the sorts of things that it has a mandate to do. But when that mandate extends to NFP in water buyback, so they're not going to tell us, that's subterfuge, when it extends to $107 million to stop farmers doing what they have done for generations in Western Australia, and that is produce some of the finest sheep in the world and send them via ships, via boats, with the exporter supply chain assurance system in place to ensure that the sheep animal husbandry and welfare standards are first class, world class, internationally best standard. And yet, what we will see now, when we ban the sheep and live trade, and we will, what we'll see is that trade being taken over by countries who do not have the same welfare standards for their sheep. And we saw what happened in June 2011 when, as a knee-jerk response to a television program on the ABC, haven't they been in a bit of trouble lately, but on the ABC, about Indonesian cattle trade. And that had a marked effect on the sales in Wagga Wagga. Now, Wagga Wagga is a long way from where those cattle were coming, but there was a fear, and markets are run by fear, that so many of those long-horned cattle were then going to come south because there weren't going to be the export markets for them in Indonesia. So goodness knows what will happen when the live sheep trade is phased out. I did Paul Murray live on Sunday night, and after the show, and I do thank Sky News for coming to Parkes to promote the very best of what is in that central western town. A young farmer bailed me up in the railway hotel, and he was vociferous in his criticism of Minister Watt. He was absolutely apoplectic about why the sheep trade was being stopped. And here's a young bloke who's starting out, who's starry-eyed and bushy-tailed and looking forward to a career in agriculture, and he knows, just like so many people in the Riverina and Central West do, because it's a great sheep-producing area, that this decision by Labor will affect the price at the sale yards. And Wagga Wagga and Forbes are the top two livestock selling centres in the Southern Hemisphere. Number one, number two respectively. And sheep, cattle, livestock, big part of our local economy. We don't need to have the sheep price plunge. It was bad enough last November without the live export trade being affected, that sheep were selling in Wagga Wagga for $1 a head because of all sorts of influences and outcomes. But we don't need our farmers to work for nothing. None of the public servants here in Canberra would work for nothing, but they're the ones who are making the calls, and ministers, being led by the nose, are following them. And just last week, I had the good fortune to have Senator Deb O'Neill in Cowra to talk about the government funding for the swimming pool, which is being, at long last, replaced after it's been in operation for 60 years. And Cowra deserves a new swimming pool, no question. And the Mayor, Ruth Fagan, was there, and she's doing a good job as the new Mayor, taken over from Bill West. And Senator O'Neill had this to say, and I've got respect for Senator Deb O'Neill, I do, but she had this to say. Since coming to government, Labor has made a really big effort to ensure that probity in all the decision-making about how funding is allocated is enlivened by our processes. So I was actually part of a panel, which was a multi-party panel, and we had independents in there. It was from all over the country. And while I'm happy to endorse anything that you put forward of merit from Carra Council, I would never be able to assess anything from within New South Wales. So that is the process. I looked at hundreds, literally hundreds of applications from all around the country, and on merit, those went through an EOI process and into the next phase where, this is the important line, the department made it, that's the decision, at an arm's-length decision about meritorious applications. The department. And what I do find is that so many ministers, and you only have to look at under-the-pump Minister for Immigration at the moment, who is running this country? Is it the bureaucrats, who will never have their name on a ballot paper, who are faceless people? And while I've got respect for the process and I've got respect for public servants, I do. I was the Deputy Prime Minister for more than 3 years, and Secretary Stephen Kennedy and Secretary Simon Atkinson did a wonderful job in my portfolio area, and the public servants under them, Pip Spence, now the head of CASA. I've got every respect for the role that they played. But it's not up to the public servants to run the country. It's the government. We are in a Westminster system. We've got a cabinet process. They shouldn't be, as public servants, deciding where regional funding is spent. It should be the minister should have the final say, because it's the minister who takes advice from, in this case, her members and members opposite, members across the aisles. And the difficulty with that process is that Labor always carried on a treat about probity, etc., when it came to regional funding. And yet there was all those regional programs, and the member for Bendigo would agree with me here, no doubt. Member for Crangamite would too. Is that they are so much. No, you will. Trust me. Wait till you hear what I have to say. Okay, they are totally oversubscribed, and regional members. You'll get a program worth, let's say, $1.5 or $250 million, and you'll get $1.5 billion worth of applications. So you can't put you can't satisfy everybody. You can't please everybody. And then, of course, it comes down to, well, where are we going to spend the money? And as a minister, I endeavoured to do it in as fair a possible way. But let me tell you, whilst you took advice from the bureaucrats, they didn't get the final say. And the fact that Deb O'Neill couldn't have, or wouldn't have, or didn't have a say on those projects within New South Wales because she's a New South Wales senator, I do find extraordinary. And I did say I had respect for Deb O'Neill, I do. She's actually a good friend of mine. But well, she's a duty senator for Riverina, and she was part of that process, member for Bendigo. But I find it extraordinary that we've got the bureaucrats making decisions on allegedly in the immigration space. We've got bureaucrats making the calls on which regional towns will get funding and which regional towns won't. And then, of course, we come to the communications area, where the Shadow Minister for Communications, David Coleman, stood at the dispatch box just on Tuesday and talked about, on page 74 of the Auditor General's report, saying that in Victoria 100% of the funds, this is round 6 of the Mobile Black Spot program, in Victoria went to marginal seats, and 100% of them are in, wait for it, Labor electorates. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? And then he said, he was talking about New South Wales. And again, 100% of the funds allocated went to marginal seats, and 100% of those, where do you reckon they went? Labor electorates. Labor electorates. I mean, this is shameful. This is shameful, and that's what the Shadow Minister for Communications said. And the government must apologise, and I agree with him. This was a missed opportunity by Labor in the budget. It was totally a missed opportunity to protect our farmers, to support our farmers, to applaud our farmers for what they do. Why Labor is spending NFP money, that's code for hundreds of millions of dollars, to buy back water to stop food production is beyond belief. Why Labor is shutting out sheep trade and having $107 million spent on that is appalling, and why Labor isn't addressing the cost of living issue, which began on their watch, is nothing short of abrogating their responsibility as a good government. But good government and Labor do not belong in the same sentence.
The question